Good day, good people. In this video, I will show you how to use document.createElement, element.setAttribute, and node.appendChild to build up HTML document objects in memory and attach them to the DOM. We will use our pricing tile JSON model to drive this process. If you've been following along with these videos so far, we have added a simple rendering API to the browser, and we have modeled our pricing tile HTML with a JSON object. So the next step, we are going to add two private functions to our simple renderer module, and the first of which will be a wrapper that will allow us to use document.createElement and document.setAttribute to create HTML nodes. So we're going to call it createElement, and into that we'll pass a type, an attribute name, and an attribute value. Then we will say var element equals document.createElement type, and that is going to create us like a div or an h1 or whatever. Document.createElement creates any HTML type based on a string that you pass into it. Element.setAttribute is going to be a function off of the element that was created with document.createElement. So to set an attribute, such as a CSS class, we can say element.setAttribute. That's going to say the attribute name, class, and attribute value, some class. And then we will return the element. The next function we're going to create is going to be the pricing tile function, and this function is going to be attached to the object that we executed our self-executing function with, so that we can access it by key. Pricing tile equals function, and into that we're going to pass a target element and our pricing tile models. So you may be wondering where pricing tiles and target element are going to come from, and what we're going to do is we're going to modify our render element public API so that we can pass in the ID of an element to which we want to append any HTML that we create. So first we're going to modify the way we pass in configuration by creating an object called config equals object, and within that we will have a type which will be pricing tile. We will have a target ID, which we'll go add to our HTML code in just a minute, called target. And then we'll have our actual pricing tile models. Now we will go add this ID to our HTML file. So our index.html, we're not looking for the container, and we want to leave the cards the way they are for now. So we're actually going to take and give this card deck element, or div element, an ID of target. Now we will come back over to our app.js, and within our render element function we will say var container element equals document.getElement by ID config.target ID, or, and this is just shorthand in case that was not passed in, we can say target. Then we will say container element dot inner HTML equals nothing, so we're just going to clear out what was there before, and we will say self open brackets. Now this syntax allows us to access this object that we executed our function with via a key. So since we added our pricing tile function to self, when we pass in this config object, we can actually say config or self config.type, and then pass in a container element and the config.pricing tile models. This is good because this means that we could then extend our object with more types if we wanted to. Okay, so before we go any further, let's make sure we saved everything. File, save all, and go back to the browser and test what we've done so far. So we'll just refresh this guy. Okay, so we refresh the browser and we see our original pricing tile models and our new config object. So we'll step over that. We see we have an object with our pricing tile models, a target ID, and a type. So we'll go ahead and let that finish executing. We'll set some breakpoints in our new functions, and we'll let that continue through to the end. Now we can come to the Chrome console here and say sr.renderElement config. Okay, so our config object is passed into our render element function. We see we have config.targetID. That will allow us to get a reference to this container HTML element, and it is the card deck. Then we will clear out this HTML. If you see my mouse hovering over it, the next step over this code is going to clear that out. And as you can see here, the object in our simple renderer, it actually has a function called pricing tile. And since we passed in this config.type equals pricing tile, we can access that function with this syntax and pass in this container element and the models that we're going to be working with. So over here on the left, we see step into function call. So we'll step into that, and we can see we successfully went into the pricing tile function with target element and our pricing tiles model. Okay, so our next step is actually going to finish filling out the pricing tile function so that we can read in our JSON model and build up our HTML based on the JSON model. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab this commented out HTML and paste it here so I can refer to it as I'm building up my DOM objects with JavaScript. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and add a loop for pt length equals pricing tiles that we passed in dot length, and then we will say for var j equals 0, j less than pt length, j plus plus. And within this loop, we are going to get a reference to each card in our pricing tiles array, which is going to contain just one object for now, and then so that we can access the properties of the object. For our card equals pricing tiles of j. Okay, so our next step here will be to use our create element function to start building up the document objects that represent this HTML structure. So we will say var card container equals create element, and that element type is going to be div, and it will have a class of, and we'll just go ahead and copy and paste the class out of here. And we will say create the card header, card or var card header div equals create element div class, and that class will be card header. Now this code is going to be fairly repetitive, so I'm just going to go ahead and save it now and step through it in the DOM one time, and then I'm going to paste in chunks as we continue to make this kind of speed along. All right, so we can come over here and refresh the browser. And we will do what we did just a moment ago, which is execute simple render.renderElement. That will pass in our config object. We will step down into our pricing tile function. I'll just go ahead and play through on that. We will now get the length of the array, 1, and start grabbing each card as we go. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to use the information in this card object to fill in the inner text of our container elements as we build them up. So as a last piece here, I'll show you what our create element function will do by stepping into it here. So as we can see, we have an element type passed in, an attribute name, which is class, and an attribute value. So 1, 2, and 3, now we have an element built up in memory that is ready to attach to the DOM. And you can actually select the element, right click, and say evaluate in console to see that you have indeed built up an HTML node. Okay, as we continue here, I've actually added the rest of the code that's going to build up our DOM objects, and I've added comments. So if you get this code off of my GitHub repo, you can actually look through this yourself. But of interest is the fact that all we're doing is we're taking that JSON data and using it to, using JavaScript to build up this HTML structure, attach all the nodes to each other, and then append it to the target element that we passed into our function. So this is a fair little chunk of code, but now that we have it driven by a JSON object, it's data driven, and we can control the rendering now with 1, 2, 3, or 4 JSON objects. So as this tutorial is wrapping up, I will step through this now with the complete rendering code. So refresh the browser. We will call our render function again, step into our pricing tag function. Let me see if I can give it a little more room here. So remove the breakpoints from this. As you step through this, at any point in time, if you want to evaluate what you've done so far, you can double click on that, evaluate in console. At the moment, that's just an unordered list, but as soon as it gets through this loop, it will be an unordered list with 3 list items within it. So, last but not least, as we get down here to the end, we can see that we removed what was there, and we have now built up the same DOM with JavaScript driven by a JSON data model. So there's the same HTML, and as I step over this last breakpoint here, you'll see it appear into the DOM. There is our single pricing tile. So the last piece of this tutorial I wanted to show you is that now that we have abstracted away the static HTML into a rendering API that is driven by a JSON model, we can come back to our model, create as many of these as we want. Let's just make 4. Save it away. Refresh the page. Get rid of all our other breakpoints here. Call our API from the browser console. And as we step through there, we will see 1, 2, 3, 4 tiles appear based off our JSON model rendered on the fly in the browser. Okay guys, that's it for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.